Okay, let's talk about how I got started in consulting for nonprofits. So I am Sharman. I'm a nonprofit consultant with Blessed Designs Consulting, and I work with social and environmental impact organizations, helping them to build strong foundations for the organization using collaboration, communication, branding, and strategic planning. So when I was starting my, I'm sorry, it is wild. When I was starting my first nonprofit organization, um, I thought I knew it all right. I had been in and out and around nonprofit organizations working with them and around them for like over 2 decades. And I was like, I got this, right? I know how this works. I cannot even begin to tell you how wrong I was. It is not the same as like starting an organization from scratch. It is completely different. And I spent all my time Googling everything, talking to a bunch of talking to just a bunch of different people, trying to figure out what it was, what was going on, what I needed to do. And I don't want to say I got like so much bad advice, but maybe some not so great advice. Um, I talk about this one story about trying to like file for my 501(c)(3), and somebody had immediately been telling me, you want to go for like the regular form, because you'll have to fill it out again once you hit that $50,000 mark. And so I am pulling all this information together, making sure we have everything to fill out the 10, is it 1029 form to for the 501(c)(3). And I was really struggling with like the financial portion and making sure, like all of our paperwork was intact and that we were giving the right information to them. And so I called up the IRS and I was talking to them, and the lady, she was just like, "Oh," she's like, have you thought about filling out the 1029 easy form?" And I was like, "No," because I was told that once we hit the $50,000 mark, we would have to then um fill it out all over again. And so I'm just gonna fill this one out for. And there was this like really awkward pause. And she was like, "Yeah, that's not how that works." And all I could just be was like, "Oh, okay." And then the other portion was that I had been told, or I think I had read an article online, that grant funders and donors didn't like the easy form because they felt like you didn't have your stuff together. And so that it was much better to fill out that regular form and, of course, get a lawyer to help you. I think this was a lawyer's thing. And again, the woman was like, "Yeah, they won't know. They won't know unless you tell them there's nothing on your like determination letter or anything that says that you filled out the easy form versus just the 1029. And she's like, "Nobody's gonna know." And so I'm like, those were two examples of things, of information that just got completely wrong from just like Googling things. And I was like, this is just ridiculous, right? But I got the organization up and I got it started and going. And I think from the outside, everything looked like really, really good. Um, And I did a lot of things right, especially from an external communications and marketing and branding standpoint. Like I had that down pack. That was good. But it was a lot of the internal stuff that I struggled with and I really had a hard time with. And then trying to compile all those resources to help get us straight and standardize, and then listening to other people as well, I think was essentially like my downfall, right? I didn't have like a standardized practice. We didn't have our internal structure done well. And I was just burning out. It was ridiculous. And again, I'm just like constantly Googling stuff, constantly trying to find all these resources. And there was just like none there. But then even in the midst of that, people saw what I was doing and how I was doing things and how quickly things had gotten up and running and going. And we were getting grants and we were building all these collaborations and partnerships in the city. And so then everybody wanted to know how to do it too. And so they kept coming to me and I was like walking them through different things. And then, finally, after a while, I just completely burnt out and couldn't do it anymore. And I was like, I'm done, I'm done, I'm done. But then I got hired on and brought onto this other organization, because they were like, okay, we saw what you did over here. Can you like help us do that now? And so I did the same thing. I went and, pulled something from scratch basically and completely built it up into this great out-facing organization. But again, it was that like internal stuff that I was struggling with. And so once I had finished up with that organization and tried to help them get all that internal things and outward facing things, and they had like partnerships with the government and with like different businesses and a bunch of different organizations, and I'm like, okay, like I'm handing this off to you now, this is all yours. And then I went to another organization that asked me to help them build up theirs and their programs. And so we focused like internally on that stuff. And then I found out, wait, this external facing stuff, that branding and all that marketing stuff is still like super, super important. And I think after those 3 experiences, I was just like, this is wild and crazy. And even while I was still learning, I had compiled like all the resources and all the knowledge. And I'm like, nobody is going to go through this again, like ever, right? I do not want to see anybody go through what I went through. And so I started building the Nonprofit Launch Academy and making sure everybody had the resources in one place to get all the information that they needed to start a nonprofit, and also to recognize that all these things needed to work together, and you couldn't just do one thing without another, right? Because you come across a resource and it would be like, you got to get like grant ready. And like, what does that mean? What does it mean to be grant ready, right? It's like your finances, it's your branding and your communications and all of that stuff, but nobody really tells you that. They're just like, get grant ready, get grant. Your organization is not really grant ready. And so I thought it was just like really, really important to put all this stuff into one place so that nobody ever had to go through what I do, but they could learn from not only my mistakes, but what I knew I did right? Like I knew, like I had kept track of my finances. And so while most organizations start getting grants in like year 3 and year 4, I was getting them in year 2 because I had tracked all of our finances, tracked all of our impact. I had all that stuff. I had a really, really strong brand. I had really strong communications and marketing, and all that stuff was on point. And I was able to collaborate and partner with organizations because our out-facing brand was done so well. It was bringing in a lot of people who wanted to work with us, who liked what we were doing. And I think all of those things are really, really important. And that's why I like start at that foundation, right? You gotta start with like knowing your mission, your vision, and your values. Just knowing knowing who you are and what you're doing and why you're doing it is just really, really important. And it helps you not only just build that foundation for your organization externally, but also helps you build internally. Because let's talk about some of my mistakes that I made, right? Because while that stuff was good and I was able to get really good grants, like the internal stuff was really difficult because I wasn't like really onboarding people. I was just like, hey, here's some bylaws. Look over the website. You want to work with us? Great, fine. Let's do that. I just need for you to do that. And were they reading the bylaws? No, they weren't reading the bylaws. Nobody was doing anything. And so I think it became really important to me, or had just this huge realization that, hey, you have really got to pin down exactly what these people need to know and help them to understand. Because even when they did read the bylaws, or even when they were just like looking at the mission or just looking at what we do, they came to often their own conclusions about what that meant and what that looked like. And you really need to be able to pin down with people and make sure they're aligned with like your specific way of doing things. And that's not saying that you can't be flexible or that you shouldn't be flexible, because in some ways you should, but it also shows you like where communication needs to be tightened up, where things need to be really aligned. I think I remember one moment I had brought on a friend because I just had needed a board member, and she wanted to help. And but she was really uncomfortable with like talking about the organization because she felt like she just didn't know anything. And I was like, you do know this, you do understand, right? And so I remember we were bringing on some other people or some new members to the organization, and her and that person were both in like the academia areas, and so she really wanted to talk to them, and I was like, go for it. And she's like, should I do it alone, or should I'm like go for it, you got this. And it was great because she spent a good like half an hour talking with this person, getting to know them and introducing them to the organization. And then I came on a little later and was just listening to her talk, and I was like, it was like this, like my baby was all grown up because she had it. She had the mission down. She understood what the organization was. And sometimes it just takes a little time. And then sometimes it takes you being very intentional about training people and helping them to understand what you guys are doing, and making sure that they can then relay that. And so now, even in my time, I'm all like, if you can't like repeat your mission and your vision and your values in your sleep, then you need to go back to the drawing board. It's that important to make sure everybody is aligned, because it not only helps you understand like different programs and services that you should offer based on these things, but it also helps anybody coming in. It helps your donors understand if you know it down pack. It helps your volunteers if they know, right? It helps anybody, any of the communities that you serve, completely understand what you are and what you're about and what you're trying to do. And so I'm like, so yes, so that was like one of the things that I got right, but then also got wrong, right? Because our onboarding process wasn't that great, but at the same time, we at least knew like who we were, and once we were able to convey that properly, it stuck. And so these are just like some of those things, like the financial part. Again, we got really, really right, because I was really, really adamant about tracking everything. And so it made it easier for us to think about like what we needed to do and make those budget projections, because we knew what we were doing and we knew where we wanted to go. And we were able to project, hey, this is how much we need for our organization to really be able to have the impact that we want to have. This is what we're going to need for these different organizations. And then a lot of times, again, it was just partnering with other organizations that were in that place. And I'm really always grateful to this one organization that we worked with, and she like sat down with us and was like, hey, we need to start thinking about this nonprofit in a little more of a business stance, because you're serving and you're doing great, but in order to grow, then we need to figure out what that looks like, right? What this money portion looks like, and how to get to where it is that you really, really need to be. And so again, and a lot of this is just people who are just really generous with their time and really generous with their information, which is another reason that I am always, always, always just like giving of my time and information. And I don't gatekeep, because I want people to know, right? I don't want people to start from square zero. I want them to have all the information that I have. I want them to be able to build the greatest organization that they can. And I think that just comes with having all the information that you need to have, as well as being able to build just, again, on that solid foundation. You really need to have your foundation solid. And you need to have people who are willing to help and to understand. And I think another part of that is also just being willing to listen, which I think is another thing that we got right. Even maybe to a fault though, right? Because I was saying I was getting so much information, and then it's like, how do you parse through all this and what works and what doesn't? But being able to listen and not holding so hard onto what you come up with in your mind, and recognizing that some things have to be a little flexible, right? If just because you think something is a problem doesn't necessarily mean the community that you're serving thinks it's a problem. And all of these things are so super important when building your organization. And this little origin story just turned into completely something else. But this is where we are, and this is how I am. And I'm like, a lot of it was just having so much information, having so much to parse through, and through Google and all the different information, that I just did not want anybody else to have to do that, because it's a wild ride, y'all. It's a wild ride. And starting nonprofits aren't the easiest thing in the world, but I think they play such an important role in this world and in this community because, our society doesn't quite work in the best, most ideal way for everybody. So having these organizations that can kind of bridge that gap is really super important, and making sure they can sustain themselves and thrive is really important to me. So that is how we got started. That is why we're here. That is what I do. And kind of what I got right, what I got wrong, and why we're making sure everybody else doesn't necessarily fall into the same pitfalls that I did. So there you go. There it is. Bye.